All right, another week begins. Today is the week 5, right? Week 5. We're at the 1/3 mark of the semester. At some point this will be on. There we go. Today is the 22nd of September. We have a full week of lecture this week, and then next week is our second exam next Monday, 1 week from today. All right. So here we are. Today we're going to finish up socialization and begin social interaction most likely. And we should, we'll see. We'll definitely get through chapter 5. We'll see where we are on Wednesday in terms of chapter 6. But it's definitely going to be 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then we'll see about chapter 6. We'll see where we are on Wednesday and Friday. Next exam is on Monday, same format, same 10-minute grace period, all the same things. Any questions about the schedule? Okay. So I believe when we last met, we were talking about the agents of socialization. Correct? So we'll go through this again, just for review purposes. There are various agents of socialization. Another word you can use to substitute for agents of socialization is what? I think I gave you that last time. Or even if I didn't. What's one word you can substitute for agents of socialization? I know it's one thing. I'm asking you questions. You were sleeping like 20 minutes ago. I get it, but let's think about it for a minute. What's another term you can use for agents of socialization? Did I mention we have an exam on Monday? Think about it for a minute. What term can you use to substitute for agents of socialization that captures the same idea? Sort of in the summary form. Yes. Childhood development is the first part of socialization. So there are some agents of socialization like the family that will be more involved with early child development. So you're on the right track. Yes? One word. One word. Thank you. Yes. Well, that's family, but there are various agents of socialization. This is just the first one. All right? Yes? Roles? Roles. No, not in this case. Yes. What were you going to say? Okay. Well, no, that's part of needs model. I was saying relationships. You're getting warmer. Yes. Well, that's generalized though, right? That's part of the big picture. Anyone else? Influences. Agents of socialization are influences. They're influences on us. That's the big picture. So the family, most influential, early in life and remains influential throughout your life, whether you like it or not. And schools come next, and we haven't covered this yet, right? I think this is what we're going to talk about. So schools are the next agent of socialization, and this was discussed in the chapter. This book, Nurture Shop. Any chance anybody knows what the study was about? So what stage of school do you think these two children are in? Preschool, daycare, right? And there hasn't been a lot of research done on that stage of agent of school, which is an agent of socialization. So this book, Nurture Shock, which I believe is still talked about in the chapter, wrote a book and did a study on the influences of daycare, the earliest stages of school. Now, how old can what's the youngest a child can be in daycare? Does anybody know what the minimum age is? It's younger than that. Yes. Sorry? 6 months. I can't. 6 weeks, so about a month old, right? That's when a mother goes back to work from maternity leave and doesn't have any family members to work, just chooses to go back to work. And now it's a little different. Fathers can stay home for another 6 weeks, and there's all kinds of changes. But the youngest a child can enter into daycare is 6 weeks and all the way up to kindergarten, right? So it's a very pivotal stage of socialization. And this book did a study on it. And these were the major findings. 1, children who go to daycare have higher levels of hyperactivity. Probably not a surprise. The second finding is that children who go to daycare have better language skills. Again, probably not a big surprise. They're around a lot of other kids, and they're talking to them. At the same time, they're running around screaming, which at this stage is fine. And the third finding was interesting. I mean, I think they're all, but there's one that you probably weren't expecting necessarily. The third finding was that participation trophies are not a good idea. Rewarding children for something they hadn't really done leads them to taking fewer positive risks later in life. Right? If everybody gets a participation trophy, who's trying harder the next time? Right? If everybody gets an A, who's trying harder in the next class? And who's taking more challenging classes? And who's reading more difficult books? That's the issue. So there is a set of important socialization learnings, even at this early stage. Any questions? A friend of mine has a daughter. She's now in college, but at the time she was in high school and she was running track and field. She was pretty good at it. So a couple summers ago, she comes up here she was in a club team at the time, and she comes up to run a race. So of course I go. It's right on our track. And her father's a friend of mine, since I was 8 years old. So of course, we were talking, and she comes in second in the race, 200 meters. She was like the youngest girl in the race. It was a very nice experience for her. She did well. So he says, "Okay, come on. I'm going to go take a picture of her on the medal stand." So he says, "Come on, I'm going to take a picture of her on the medal stand." So as you know, even if you're not a big fan of track and field, the highest step is for first place, the gold medal, and then step down a little bit from that is silver and then bronze, right? And all three are great. And I notice that there's a first step for first place, and a second step for second place, and a third step for third place. And then down on the ground, it says 4 and 5. They're now giving out medals. I guess this is not a big NCAA Olympic sport, but a sanctioned event. But they were literally giving out medals now for the next person who texts is sitting in the first row. It's enough of this crap. You want to step outside, do it. But we're not texting, and I will put people right in the first row. They're giving out medals for 4th and 5th place. I think there were 10 girls in the entire race. What do you think of that? I don't even know what color. I don't even know a medal that it's gold, silver font. I don't even know what color they gave for the fourth and fifth events, right? Finishers. What do you think of that? Is that a good thing, or I mean, this study doesn't think it's a good thing, right? What do you guys think? Is that cool? Everybody, get something.
Positive thing that can come from that is say increase the girl sees click, you might pressure her to go because she knows if she just takes it out.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting. Fair. Anyone else? Yes. Right. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
I feel like, it doesn't really push you to do much better, but at the same time, they are on different levels. So like, that's the only
Right.
positive to it, so like, you're working your way up to get higher.
Fair. I mean, you're right. I should have been more clear about this. This wasn't, you all these NCAA team or the Olympics or something like that. This was a club event. But, okay. Well, that's what this is all about. So this book would say that's not a good thing. It limits someone's, efforts later on. But in general, as an agent of socialization, school is the first formal process. It's the first defined curriculum and the first clear expectations of behavior. So family, first agent of socialization. Again, it could be as early, it's not typical at 6 weeks, but it could be. You ever, just out of curiosity, there's always a chance. Is anybody here work in a daycare or have worked in a daycare? Okay, so you see, so what are your thoughts about this? Well, going back to daycare, like the influences on kids. Like, do you think a lot of those things are true? That they have more activity, they speak better, or they get a lot of participation
Well,
trophies?
in what I was doing, I was like a tutor and a supervisor. So they would, like one of my students would push themselves whenever they complete a set of work, they get an award, a certificate, and a toy.
Yeah.
And it would push them to like read quicker, and then they know they can't make
So you think it was a good thing?
Yeah.
How about you? It's very unusual that men work in daycare. How do you work that out? No, that's great. I don't think it's fair that someone, that men don't have opportunities that they want, especially if they're younger than 16 or something like that. But it's quite unusual. So you wouldn't put it in All right, so after school come peer relationships. You start spending time with people of similar backgrounds, right? You begin developing peer groups or friendship groups. And this can be a two-edged sword, the fact that people are being stratified by certain characteristics, right? So the 5-year-olds start spending time with the 5-year-olds. The middle-class kids are spending time with the middle-class kids, and so on. And in a sense, it almost creates early stratification, which we'll talk about later. And, there's a lot of evidence that, especially in adolescence and maybe even to college age, that peer groups and peers become even more influential than parents, maybe around the same age as many of you. You think that's true? Do you feel more comfortable turning to a friend of your age and who's a student here, experiencing the same things, rather than calling home and saying, hey, I've got a problem with a relationship, can you help me with it? Right? You think it's just easier to talk to somebody who's closer to the same age? Or no? Yeah.
Situation where it's easier to talk to a peer than a person to talk to.
Okay. Yeah.
I feel like if you're talking to someone like around your age, they also like relate to you, they're also gonna give you better advice
Even though that older person may have gone through exactly the same thing.
But like, I feel like it's the same age, it's like, okay, like, and it's like two different like eras kind of, so it's like,
Okay.
maybe a little bit
Yeah,
different.
okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes?
I feel that's what when you're speaking to your family, they have like certain expectations for you, and it's like certain things in which you're already talking to them. You're less likely to go to your parents and do something bad, unrelated to something. You're more likely to go to your friends because they're not gonna remember it.
Okay. Thank you. Now we talk about the mass media. This is much more complicated. From the reading, why is this much more complicated? Who can fill in the blank there? Why did the text chapter talk about how the mass media is much more complicated than the other agents of socialization? I mentioned we have an exam on Monday. Why is the mass media more complicated? Yes.
Well, you got like social media, and that is like face-to-face communication, less not like valuable, but valuable.
I'm just curious, do you expect people in their own suite, like when they're like 5 feet away from them, or not 5 feet, but they're just around the corner, instead of getting up and go over there? Okay, yeah, I see your point. Well, anyone else from the reading tell us why mass media is more complicated? Yes, thank you. Hold on. Yeah, it's not just a simple audience, right? It's not just we're all watching television. It's a known form of the mass media. It's because the mass media can be almost anything now. Largely because of the internet, almost anything now can be reaching a wide audience. Makes me think about the college newspaper. Right, the ads. Does anybody read that anymore, by the way? It used to be a big deal. There was no internet, so they used to have bins all around campus, and they would take the physical copies of the ads and put them out every week, and people used to grab a copy and actually read, the paper. But once the internet came, they shifted to a website, which is great, but now they can reach a much wider audience. I'm not sure that anybody reads it, but they can reach a much wider audience. The reason why it's complicated is because it's difficult to capture all the different ways that things reach people. Very wide audience. So some examples. One, song lyrics. People don't usually associate song lyrics with the mass media, but obviously it reaches a lot of people and influences them. But it's usually not considered the mass media, or video games, or children's books. And one that you really might not think of, that does reach a lot of people, are billboards. So here's a billboard. I think I still have it up here. Yeah. So this is a billboard that was up in the 90s. But I'm sure all of you recognize the TV show that's being advertised, right, friends? Right? It's still on TV somewhere, or the internet, wherever you can find it. And, these three main female characters, at least at the time, and probably still now, are just like model thin, right? So NBC decides to put up this billboard across the West in, California and Arizona. And what's the problem with this? What's the influence that might be perceived? Yeah. Yeah, it's cute. It's fashionable. It's something cool, right? According to this, it's not, but according to this, right? And if you want to be like them, and they were very popular at the time, it was like the #1 show or #2 show in America at the time. you know, this is something. So they took this billboard down in a couple of days because people obviously noticed that this was not a good form of influence. But billboards reach a lot of people, and it's usually not associated with the mass media. Any questions about why it's difficult to dimension the impact of the mass media? Just out of curiosity, which sociological perspective would be discussing the influence of the mass media? Yes? Postmodern. Everybody clear about that? Well, this is very much a postmodernist issue. And many others. Okay. This is actually, now we're no longer talking about agents of socialization. That's just up there. A couple last things before we get on to chapter 5. Really two things left that I want to talk about. Anticipatory socialization. So this should be familiar to a lot of you. Because again, many of you are new to the university. You know, we're here about 4 or 5 weeks now. Anticipatory socialization is behavior that is engaged in when a new environment is expected. Right? So you decided to come to UAlbany, put down your deposit at some point, I guess, last March, April, something like that. The decisions come out in March, so maybe you decided in March, April, something along those lines. My folks, I don't remember when I was. But the decisions go out in March, and then you have to decide within a certain period of time. All right, so it's been a few months. What did you do right after you made the decision to come here, and you know you were coming here? Did you do anything to minimize the culture shock? You didn't want to walk in the first day completely unaware of what to expect. Yes. Right. What, did you find a lot there?
Yeah.
Were they talking about me on TikTok? Okay. Just checking, because I don't go on TikTok, but I wouldn't know. But you got some valuable information? Okay. Anybody else do something like that or something else? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. You didn't want to get culture shock or get blindsided for a case. Anybody else do anything else? Yeah. Yeah, that's it's a big deal here, right? You know, you don't want to be walking in 30 minutes late because you couldn't tell. And the LCs are easy, but there are lots of classrooms in the basement and in humanities and stuff where it's not on the directory. You got to walk around a corner or ask somebody. Yeah. Anybody else? I thought. Yeah.
Orientations based on my major.
Orientation, right? Going to the tour, all that stuff. That's what this is all about, right? Because you don't want to be blindsided, right? It was a little bit worse last year. When I was a student here, you didn't know who your roommate was going to be. You guys know that, right? You get to communicate with them before you start, right? No, I used to, hey, here's a guy. He's your roommate. Okay, that wasn't the greatest decision. But anyway, so that's anticipatory socialization. The only last thing, we do want to talk about this, yeah. So gender socialization connects this chapter with the chapter on gender equality, which we will get to in a few days, weeks, whatever it is. And so we're going to end this chapter talking about gender socialization, and then we're going to start the chapter on gender equality in a couple days and pick this up. So again, now that you understand what roles are, who'd like to remind us what roles are? Is gender and roles, right? What does gender roles mean? We just talked about, not you so much, but based upon your social status, which still, but yeah. So, in this case, it's the expectations of someone's behavior of a certain gender in society. And again, this is very cultural. I told you when we went over chapter 3, the more you understood culture in that chapter, the more you'll understand a lot of other topics. So the learning of the expectations of gender through such agents of socialization as the ones we just talked about, right? They're not different. It's just another example of agents of socialization. And what we learn from them includes what is expected of people of certain genders. Gender theorists, and there are such people, argue that gender roles can be more powerful and influential than other roles that people fill, largely because of the response from society. We will talk much more about that in chapter 10. I think it's on the slide. Any questions? And the last reminder is where we started this discussion, that socialization is a lifelong process. Do not get confused by the fact that we spent a good amount of time on early child development. That is primary socialization. But what you're experiencing now is secondary socialization, and that can be just as important. Because you will not be the same person when you finished college as you were when you started, right? Your sense of social norms and social values, social roles and social statuses will all be enhanced, right? Any questions before we move on to chapter 5? Okay. Chapter 5 and chapter 4 are, as I mentioned, related to each other. Who can tell us how chapter 4 and chapter 5 are related to each other? Just read one thing. Because in some textbooks, it's just one big chapter. Yeah.
Chapter 1 goes more into depth about like the roles that people take on.
Okay, yeah, that's actually very good. It goes into more detail at this micro-sociological level about the roles that people take on. That's a good start. Anybody else? Anything else that you noticed? Okay. I mentioned micro-sociological roles. We talked when we first introduced symbolic interactionism that symbolic interactionism is the only micro-sociological perspective. So as you were reading this, you should have noticed that this was really all about symbolic interactionist issues. And symbolic interactionists or micro-sociologists study daily life. They look at the small details. They look at small group interactions. Students often ask, what's the difference between micro and macro? Micro-sociologists, symbolic interactionists look at the small group interactions and the real detail of daily life. And what it teaches us how social interaction shapes reality. Where else have we talked about reality since the last exam? Don't worry, most of this is posted in your textbook, so you'll be able to catch it. Yes?
The guy that follows postmodernism.
Okay, do you remember his name? John, right? Baudrillard. And what did Baudrillard say about reality? Oh, it's somebody else. Yeah. The more we're exposed to mass media, the more our sense of reality is distorted to the point where you can't really, he believed that we couldn't tell the difference. So how social interaction shapes reality. So this is a different way of looking at reality. Baudrillard's view was a postmodernist view. This is a view that is symbolic. Interaction is the microsociology. People that study daily life teach us how, or believe that it teaches us how people strategically prepare for a presentation of one's social self. This is the name of a book, Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. Who wrote that book? One of the important theorists that we touched on earlier, that we will spend a lot of time on later and now. Who wrote Presentation of Self in Everyday Life? A prominent name in chapter 5. Yes. Irving Doss. Right. And we'll be talking about him momentarily. And, bless you, how small groups are a reflection of the large-scale social institutions. Social institutions we've talked about, right? The large-scale segments of society that have been around for many generations and that have their own norms and values that they pass down to try to maintain their place. Who can remind us about a couple of examples of social institutions? How about you name one? Yes? Education. Right, so college is a smaller part of the larger educational social institution, but you're right. How about one more? Yes? What? The correctional institutions, right? Right, government or the correctional institutions. So the large-scale segments. Marriage, religion, sports, those kind of things. So daily life, as you're learning, or have learned, is filled with lots of unwritten rules and written rules about how social interactions are supposed to take place. So I give you a syllabus, that's part of the written rules, right? Show up on time, here's when you make sure you're here for the exams, you know, that kind of stuff. Don't text, that kind of stuff. Well, what have you learned in your, you know, assuming you're a freshman, you don't have to be a freshman. But what have you learned this semester about the unwritten rules about interactions at you all do? Right, this is the stuff I don't tell you about that, you know, no one actually writes down, but you've learned it interacting with people. Think about it. I'll give you one that I remember. And I know this has changed because they don't give you trays in the dining halls anymore, right? You have to just take. So they used to give you'd be able to get trays in the dining hall. And if you didn't take your tray off, throw the trash away, put the glasses and all that stuff, people would yell at you, right? Even though it didn't necessarily say anywhere that you have to do this. If it was like peer pressure, right? If that guy didn't take it out, he just walked away, people would, hey, what you doing? You know, like that, right? And then the next time he didn't do it. You learned on the unwritten rule. I know you would do it, but he would be a good citizen. What else have you learned? Like, that you learned through interaction. Yes? Okay. That's one. How about this one? Yes. Oh, you stuck with the high school. Okay. Yep. Yeah, I don't put that in the syllabus that I do so many words, right? Information, somebody has to. You don't want to. Yeah, that's one. Right. High school, you get a hard time with you all that, right? How about one more? You haven't learned anything in the interaction? Yes. Okay. The underground communications about, you know, what the EZAs are, which one to avoid, that kind of stuff. Okay, that's probably the same as lots of other places. So these written and unwritten rules are being reshaped throughout people's through people's creative responses to new situations. Again, you try something and you get a response. Right? Kind of like the looking glass self that we talked about. You give feedback in small group interactions and it revises your sense of self. This means that the rules change as people go about their day. So you have to pay attention. And obviously it's different from where you were in high school to now, and it continues to change, right? Any questions? I still think about all the written and unwritten rules that changed when we get shut down for COVID, right? When we finally came back, there was a big piece of yellow tape right around here. It was a message. No one ever said anything about it, but that was so the students stayed behind the line, right? But they never actually put up a sign, stay behind the yellow line, but they put up the tape and they just assumed everybody would figure it out. That was some experience. I'm sure it was for you too, but to be here, I still remember the day, and I'll make this brief. I still remember the day that people kind of figured out that we were going to shut down a college, a university, and the students are walking up to me. We didn't even think of it. They just walked up to me like, nothing was going on. They really think that like I knew something that, everybody else didn't know. I said, yeah. But what I did tell them is, this is one of many traumatic experiences you can have in your life. And you get through them all, right? You got through 9/11 and all those things, and you think it's going to be the big. And I'm sure you've gone through a lot. You went through COVID, you were just somewhere else, right? And it was very tough, but you adjusted. Okay. So, we were talking about Irving Goffman. We've talked a lot about European sociologists and American sociologists, but this is a case of a man who was a Canadian sociologist. He was born in Toronto. And he ended up working at a couple of universities in the United States. He started out at UC Berkeley, and he ended up at Penn, right? University of Pennsylvania. Just out of curiosity, how many of you know that's an Ivy League school? I don't think everybody knows that. Came along a little later, right? By the way, this is not on me on the exam. This is personal trivia. How many of you know why the Ivy League is called the Ivy League? If you've been in my class before, let's say. What do they call the Ivy League? Does anybody? It's not. Again, it's not the Ivy League. Does anybody know? Think they know? Nobody has any guesses? A lot of people think it's because if you go to the campuses, there's lots of ivy on the wall, but that's not it. Yeah. Oh, you know that other one. Maybe you know this one. Yeah. What about their sports program? Well, the sports teams are okay. The problem with the Ivy League sports teams is they don't have any athletic scholarships, even though they're Division I. But you're on the right track. So originally, there was Columbia. Let me get this wrong. It was Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth, and Columbia. I think that's what I was right. Originally, there were those 4 teams. What's the Roman numeral for 4? Yeah, IV. There you go. You can win lots of money from. No, don't bet on that. But you can win bragging rights with your roommates. Okay. There's the book I was mentioning before. Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. Goffman wrote several books, but that's the one that we're going to talk about most in this chapter. And in this book, he develops the dramaturgical approach. Who would like to tell us what the dramaturgical approach is? It's a great Scrabble word. It's like 200 points. What's that? You ever heard the word? Did you read the chapter? You heard the word. Anybody remember from the reading what the dramaturgical approach is? Or dramaturgy, yes.
It like suggested that like each phase of a situation could be treated as like separate scenes.
Scenes in what setting? That you're close. Where are scenes usually take place?
Just like I guess like interaction like face to face.
Yeah, but what in the media? What do you see that has scenes in it? Movies, TV shows. Yep. Not a collaboration so much. It's the analogy that that society is the theater, and we are all actors in the theater, and these are all performances. That everything we do when we are interacting with other people are performances in this theater situation. And I have a video to show you, so it's not clear, it'll be clear. So he came up with this approach that all social interactions are presentations of oneself in the theater, and then we are all actors, and he goes into detail about props and backstage and front stage, just like in the theater. So again, the videos in this class are usually very brief, but I think this will be very helpful. So this is where you got the idea. Well, does anybody know where you got the idea for the dramaturgical approach? You know why manhole covers around, but you don't know this? No, I'm just kidding. That's more impressive, because you know how covers around. Anybody know where he got the idea from? Let's find out.
All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. The sociologist Irving Goffman took these lines from As You Like It very seriously. In his dramaturgical account of human interaction, he argued that we display a series of masks to others, enacting roles, controlling and staging how we appear, ever concerned with how we are coming across, constantly trying to set ourselves in the best light. According to Goffman, we play a range of different parts, determined by the situations we take ourselves to be in, and how we think we are coming across. We adapt what we are, depending on who we are interacting with. This is most apparent in awkward situations where we suddenly find ourselves trying to play two inconsistent roles, as for example when we accidentally encounter friends from very different social groups and have to juggle masks. The analogy with acting only goes so far for Goffman, though, because in his view there is no true self, no identifiable performer behind the roles. The roles just are the performer. He challenged the idea that each of us has a more or less fixed character, a psychological identity, at least in the role of author of The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, he did.
Okay, who'd like to summarize what we just saw? What we learned in addition to what I said? Yes. Okay, so the interaction is how they express each other. Who else have your hand? Yeah, in the back.
Urban rock ultimately believe that there is no actual core self, and that the masks surrounding the impressions that we put on certain settings were creating on.
Yes, that's a very profound thing to say, right? None of us have a true self, unless we're interacting with people. When we're alone, we have no true self because we have no interaction to base that self on. What do you think of that? Students often get offended by that statement. And that's okay. Yes.
How do we know, we all act the same when we're alone, from one experience to another. So, how do we determine how we are when we're alone if we don't have a self that bases that?
I think that's what he's saying. There's no, if the tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, it doesn't make sense. It's kind of that idea, right? How do you know that? How do you know that you're the same person when you're alone? But there's nobody to give you feedback on it, right? I think we're all a little bit biased about it. So. Yeah.
And everyone else is biased about us. We're still biased.
Okay. Yes. Well, let me remind you, you don't have to agree with any of this, you just have to understand what they're saying. Right? Well, again, every time we talk about the sense of self, it's largely been based upon feedback that we receive. If you're alone, how do you receive feedback? And that's what I think part of the argument. Just make sure. Anybody else? Again, you don't have to agree with this, right? You just have to understand what he's saying. All right, so that's the part that gets everybody's attention. Let's go to the beginning. Where did he get this idea from? Yes. Shakespeare. Yeah. He went to see Shakespeare and he sees these masks, right? 'Cause back then they didn't have the kind of makeup, it was more expensive, so they used to wear these masks and hold them up, and if you put the mask in front of your face, the audience would accept that you were whatever character was the mask represented. And he thought this was an interesting way of coming up with an analogy for society. So we're all actors in the theater, actors and actresses. And we put on these performances to manage the impression that people have of us. Because Goffman believed we as individuals, as society, believe that we are fragile and vulnerable in social interactions, and therefore we want to manage the impression that people have of us, lest they think that we are, defective in our interaction. And he says there are various ways that we try to manage the impression that people have of us. Again, performances are very important. Because if society is the theater, then we are actors and actresses and we do all performances. So one of the ways that he believed that we do this, really without thinking about it, because the beauty of Goffman, I think, is that he points out things that we do every day that we don't really think much about. And when it's pointed out to us, we go, oh yeah, I think I do. Right? So let's see if you agree with the next one. One of the things that he said that we do in these performance, impression management performances, is we give off response cries. Somebody from the reading remind us what response cries are. Yes. Good. Glad you did read. Very good. So, I'm not going to right? So let's just say there was no top on this, and she was reaching for her pen, and this went toppling over, and water started splashing off, a little bit on you, and everybody turned around, right? Well, she'd be concerned, according to Goffman, that people would have the impression that she's somewhat clumsy in every situation, right? So you would say something like, oops, or oh no, right? When someone makes a public mistake, they say something like, oh no, or oops, or something else. And Goffman would say you would do that, and everybody would do that, to try to manage the impression that these people should say, think to themselves, this was a one-time accident, you should not have the impression of me that I do this all. And you probably never do it. It probably never happened to you, right? But you're trying to send out a managing impression people haven't been by saying that. Some kind of public mistake that you're trying to manage the impression, or else you're concerned that people will have, that one impression. That's an example of impression. One of the things he believed that we do as a means of impression management. It actually happened during finals, like 2 years ago. Sort of back there, somebody spilled a coffee. They were coming in 2 minutes late with a bunch of Starbucks, and they dropped it, and everyone was focused on that. And, it was actually really annoying. But so I failed. No, I'm just kidding. I did not. Okay. Another aspect of how we doing on time? Are we out of time? All right, we got 1 minute. Then we'll pick up on audience segregation next time. All right, you're free to go. See you on Wednesday. Please make sure you read chapter 5 if you've not already done so.